Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the third part of this four-part episode on the Nigerian election on the 25th of February 2023. Our guest is Desmond Okumbor, a PhD candidate who is an Oxford SDG Research Fellow. In this episode, we discuss economics. With a $440 billion GDP, it's Africa's largest economy. However, last year, Nigeria's GDP growth shrunk, and a few weeks ago, protests erupted as a result of a cash shortage, as the government tried to bring in new redesigned notes of the Nigerian currency, the Naira. We also talk about Nigeria's corruption problem and whether there's light at the end of the tunnel for a small business to make it in this entrepreneurial nation famous for the hustle.
People are not happy with the current situation in the country.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then they've been trying to basically separate Bola Ahmed Tinubu's campaign from that of Buhari and saying, well, in trying not to discredit Buhari, right, but also acknowledging that the situation in the country needs to improve, and that has actually caused infighting between President Buhari's office and Bola Ahmed Tinubu, because he's saying you are the APC's candidate, the APC is in power, so whatever the constitution is, you are a part of it.
You are the continuation. Yeah, and that's an interesting thing because, and this brings us actually to the Naira redesign.
Oh yeah,
it's sort of like Buhari's last mic drop. I don't know, like I thought everything was just going to be, like calm, and you have an election. Yeah. It's like Buhari will just fade out. And now, and I don't know anything about this redesign, but all I know is there were a number of protests.
Well, I would call that political protest.
So for those that don't know, just give us a basic understanding.
Well, I did not have the inside information on the Naira redesign myself, but based on the little I know was that there've been conversation about redesigning the Naira, because the CBN governor felt that it was one of the ways to curb inflation, which again doesn't make sense, but that's a policy conversation. But the Naira redesign happened, but there was not adequate amount of new Naira notes.
Okay.
To dispose. The people were not able to get the Naira, and there's basically been this push of having a cashless society, which is one of one of the agendas that the CBN and the presidency is trying to push.
The Central Bank of Nigeria.
Yeah, Central Bank of Nigeria, led by Godwin Emefiele, and he's basically trying to push this notion of like a cashless society. And because they see this as one of the ways to curb corruption, because you could have more control of, or more like record keeping of like where money is going or where money is coming from. But now this is happening a week to the election. There's still shortage of Naira, new Naira notes, and the issue directive not accepting old Naira notes. So people can't deposit their old Naira notes, and then there've been basically a back and forth between extending the deadline, and now Buhari, so they went to the Supreme Court. Some of the governors went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that they should allow the new Naira notes and the old Naira notes to be used as legal tenders, right? But Buhari then issued an executive order and saying that only 200 Naira notes, so old 200 Naira notes, will work as legal tender with the new Naira notes. And this has basically led to caused infighting in his own party, actually. Nigerians are suffering because of it, because people did not have enough cash to buy goods and do normal day-to-day activities. And then there have been conversations about that it's creating hardship for Nigerians. And a week to the election, Nigerians might actually take this anger on the APC. And Bola Ahmed Tinubu's campaign team feels this is an unfair policy a week to the election, right?
Yeah.
But a counter argument to that, what people are saying is that Buhari is trying to curb vote buying.
Yes, I've seen that as well. Yeah, that could be there's something that none of the big vote buyers, the godfathers, as you said.
Exactly. So now there's this conversation that, prior to elections, politicians have hoard cash to use to enable them to for vote buying. But now you have limited amount of new naira notes, which makes it very, very difficult to actually buy votes now, since there's not enough naira notes to go around.
But I see it could go either way, because you have a predominantly youthful population, and Nigerians are famous for being the hustlers of Africa. So they're dealing with cash. Like if you're in the market and you're dealing with cash, and I think that Nigeria has one of the largest informal sectors as well, which is
yes
for most sub-Saharan African countries. It's mostly a cash society, and this
it is a
sort of like
society.
shock decision could
it
have
is
very, very tangible effects. Like if you're selling spice, or if you're selling rice on the streets, it's a very, very physical effect of the current government. And so I'm guessing the civil war between the APC members
on that. I mean, exactly, and I think that is the issue, right? In the sense that it's causing hardship for everyday people. It's causing hardship because it is a cash society. Nigerians love going with cash, so it is causing hardship for everyday people. But then at the same time, it has the potential of curbing vote buying, which is the argument that the presidency is using, because he said he wants his legacy to be that of free and fair elections, which I think is ironic, because I don't think the election he ran was free and fair, but that's another conversation. So on that issue, I think it's a very sensitive topic, because it is creating hardship on everyday people. But it's interesting enough, though, because the only people complaining about this policy is the APC. So it's Bola Ahmed Tinubu's campaign that has been against it. The governors that have gone to the Supreme Court and are fighting the presidency for these are members of his own party. So basically, this have caused civil war in the APC a week to the election.
I was actually going to ask something about sort of whoever comes into this election. You have, if not the largest or the second largest, you keep on switching to South Africa, but I think Nigeria now is the largest, 400 billion GDP wise.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So I've always sort of felt that many African countries, if not all of them, are punching way below their potential. Nigeria probably is punching maybe 20% of its actual potential, if anything.
Yeah, way below.
It should be a fully trillion-dollar economy. What does the next Nigerian president have to do differently? Like, what if he arrives? Say you are the next president of Nigeria and you sit on the table, and what's your interest?
That's a hard question, bro. That's so unfair. But anyways, go ahead.
People complain a lot, but once you ask them these
questions,
when you ask them, once you ask them these questions, if say you're on the you're on the table and you have an in tray here, what does the next Nigerian president have to do differently?
So one thing, if you look at Nigerian, like since Nigerian elections, if you look back in the first after the Civil War in the 1960, after independence, and our time to democracy and military regime, one theme has always been out there. Not the economy, not security, it's corruption. Big government, inefficiency. We have big costs in government. Is that every time most of the budget is used to actually service debt. So we have an inefficient government, and I think one of the things which Peter Obi has been really good at is basically being very, very, very vocal about this. That one of the things he would actually do was to stop the bleeding of the government coffers. Because it is an expensive government. It is too big, it is too expensive, and it is not fit for purpose. It is very inefficient. The bureaucracy is just too much. You have contract after contract not being fulfilled, and there is no clear mechanism to hold people accountable. And I think this is the biggest problem in the country that needs to be fixed, and which is why, it also relates back to corruption as well. So I think the number one thing to fix would actually to stop the bleeding, reduce the cost of governance. That is number one. That should be number one priority.
Yeah.
And oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, what sort of things do you think need to happen, I guess, in the private sector? Because you mentioned that the government, I guess, was too big, and one of the ideas would be to cut it down. So my thought process would be that the people who would probably be laid off from the state would probably go into most likely the private sector. So
Mm.
it's like, is Nigeria's private sector doing well enough to be able to absorb those sorts of changes?
Well,
Because yeah, go ahead.
well, again, I feel the private sector, it's definitely not doing well enough. Or we have
Mm,
over 40% of young people are unemployed.
yeah,
That is a damn statistics. If you call yourself the giant of Africa,
yeah,
40% of young people are unemployed. But I think, like the tech space, for example, has shown, is that the country has a lot of potential, right?
yeah,
We need the right leadership to steer the country well. We need right investment. For example, we have a very strong informal sector in the country.
mhm,
A lot of small businesses.
mhm,
These are areas where the government could actually come in to create support mechanism. For example, one of the things the Buhari regime had was a microfinance scheme that
okay,
actually supported smaller businesses. So I think I think that was a very good policy, for example.
yeah,
And I think something similar on that end to support the private sector, make it much easier for small business owners to
yeah,
actually function, create that mechanism for them to be able to run their businesses the way they want to. And then I think the issue with the big governments is that, for example, you have the civil service that isn't basically used to its full potential. We have a big civil service that isn't seem to be performing.
Also,
We have big uh big salaries for politicians. We have states, for example, you have states where pensions are not being paid, you know,
yeah,
but the money's there. You have states where pensions are not being paid. You
I
have
think there's a
states
BBC
where,
documentary on that as well.
yeah. I
yeah,
was going to say
and you have states where school teachers are not being paid.
mm,
You have teachers going to school 3 months teaching, they have not been paid, right? And there's this issue of like states not basically generating enough revenue to actually pay for the cost of governance in the states. So they have
Wow.
to rely on federal funding. So these are all these issues. I think just these different areas where the country's economy is bleeding, and it needs to stop. I think that inefficiency needs to be taken away, and I think that's the first start. That's the
mm,
first start. You need to create a working environment that actually attracts investment. The country is just there's no accountability mechanism to
Yeah.
actually lure in foreign investors.
Mm.
If you talk to business people in Nigeria, so doing when I was doing my master's in Oxford, I was fortunate enough to like speak to some people that had businesses in Nigeria, and one of the things they always talks about was the lack of support from government, the corruption, the
Yeah.
inefficiencies. So these seem to be small issues, but these are the things that are holding
They
the
pile up.
country. Because
Yeah.
Nigerians, we like you say, like we are hustlers.
yeah,
Nigerians would always create businesses for themselves. We have a very large informal sector. I have a lot of friends in the country. They couldn't find jobs after uni. They all started their own business. My cousin basically started his own graphic design business. So
So highly educated people not getting any
yeah,
jobs.
exactly. But people are able to fend for themselves. But just they need the environment to make it easier.
So they're not
And I
really
think
asking
and
for
I think that's a
handouts.
big. No, they're not. That's the thing. They're not asking for a lot. they
yeah,
are. They just say the government need to do its job. We need to stop the bleeding of the public purse. You
Yeah.
know, we need to be able to hold people accountable. We need to have a rule of law in the country. We need an efficient government that actually look and work for the interests of the country.
mm,
No, you said it well, man. You said it well. Um, and that brings me to another topic, which generally African elections miss, or perhaps for good reasons or bad reasons. You mentioned the Labour Party, and then also we talked about handouts.
Mhm.
This tendency in African elections, we don't necessarily have these political ideologies that you have in
Yes.
in other countries. And when we're asking about the issues, normally the issues are to do with religion or the personal character of the candidate. So what, like, in terms of, if you can put them in ideologies, or if they stand for anything particularly, does the APC stand for, more free market? Does the Labour Party, with the Labour Party, should we expect a Nigeria that is more protectionist? Should we, even when it comes to like foreign policy, I know Nigeria is like many other African countries, maybe not like Zambia, Chinese investment, what can we expect in terms of the style? Like, so I'm trying to sort of bring it both in terms of what we should expect
I
from
think
policies, but also
I
in terms
think
of what position they will take Nigeria.
I think all presidential candidates are basically speaking of an open market in the country. I think they're more, if I would characterize them, I'll characterize them as capitalist. I mean, but then again, Peter Obi is tagged as a capitalist one, but I think for good reason, because he
Wait,
understands.
so the Labour Party is tagged as the capitalist one?
I mean, yeah, he's been tagged as a capitalist one, for different reasons, policy wise, and just like trying to attack his image, which I don't think has been successful, to be fair, because he's able to sell his idea as well, that in the sense that he wants to see the country going from an exporting country, like a producing country, going from a producing country from a consumption country, right? So he wants to reverse the consumption culture in the country and start producing. And I think other candidates have spoken along similar lines, to be fair. So I wouldn't necessarily characterize them as protectionist or more free market. I think they're all pro, they're all pro market. They want to see, they're more in favor of seeing the country produce more, taking advantage of the number one priority that we have in this country, the number one resource that we have, which is the young population, but taking advantage of that and just making sure that we go from a consumption country to a producing country. So I think they've all spoken along the same lines. So I wouldn't differentiate them along those lines. And I think that brings me, that's the complexity in Nigerian politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is the complexity in Nigerian politics, right? There's never like a clear ideology. You're talking about kind of like, this is like part of the establishment. This is a corrupt politician. This is like, he's from this region, he's from the southeast, he's from the north, and he's so those are the issues that differentiate the candidates more than their core ideologies. So we never had to, so there's hardly a conversation about that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I despise sort of trying to put them in that Western political spectrum of left, right, center, I think also the lack that also encourages people to sort of be surprised when they come into government, like when you elect a popular person, and you vote them into government, and then you realize, oh wait, policy-wise, once you start seeing the governance rather than the campaigning, it's also,
yes,
hold on, and I don't really agree with this. I wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, the APC is a progressive party. Because it's got to be a progressive party.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we had a period where the government basically shut down the border. They shut down the border, and there's
the borders.
Yeah, they shut down the borders. I think that was 2 years ago. Yeah, they did shut.
Why? Because of COVID,
they closed the borders. No, that was not because of COVID. They closed the borders. Towards Niger, was it Niger? They were trying to stop the importation of rice in the country because they wanted the country to produce its own rice.
Wow, that's interesting, because didn't Aliko Dangote, wasn't that his first
yes.
Aliko Dangote. He's Africa's richest man, a Nigerian businessman whose net worth stands at $13.5 billion. He made his money through investing in the sugar industry, but is mostly known for Dangote Cement, Africa's largest cement producer. The rice part comes in because his father was a successful rice farmer in northern Nigeria, and in 2014, Aliko Dangote himself was reported to have invested $1 billion into commercial rice production, primarily in Nigeria. If you'd like to know more about African wealth, check out our Instagram or Facebook pages, in which we list down the wealthiest African cities and which ones have the most billionaires. let's get back into the conversation.
Yeah, so I think we actually make a mistake because, for example, like someone like Peter Obi, for example, you could consider him a capitalist, right? But he's talking about focusing on producing. The country should produce what it needs, and reduce importation. And so that's more like looking more inwards in the country rather than external, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if I see protectionist policies from him. So that's why I think it's an interesting landscape, because I don't think it helps our analytical framework if we actually align them on based on this ideology. I just don't think it helps.
I know that. Okay, so that's it for the third part of our episode on the 2023 Nigerian election on the 25th of February. Our guest is Desmond Okumbor, a PhD candidate at Oxford SDG Research Fellow. In this episode, we looked at the big economic issues, from currency to corruption to small businesses. Could this be on people's minds as they vote? We'll see. The fourth and final episode, we'll briefly discuss Nigeria's foreign policy and take a look at the Google trends, see who's the most searched candidate. Thank you for listening. Leave us a rating, follow us on all our socials, and most of all, please let us know what you think of this episode.